All right, so I have just seen Christopher Nolan's new film, Oppenheimer. Let me just get this right off the bat. It is much better than his previous movie, Tenet. I was not a huge fan of Tenet. I think Nolan got a little too into the concept and forgot the story, which is unfortunate because I think Christopher Nolan, a lot of his movies, most of his movies, have great stories. The Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Prestige, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Memento. All these movies have great stories that go along with their intriguing concepts. And you can add Oppenheimer to that list. This is a very good movie. It's very well made. And Nolan also doesn't forget to add a humanity aspect to the spectacle that you're seeing on screen. Um, Nolan also really leans into the spectacle of seeing what a nuclear bomb can do, not just physically, but psychologically to the person who is involved in creating this weapon of mass destruction. Obviously, that's where anybody would take a story about J. Robert Oppenheimer. I believe I said his name right. And Nolan does that, but he does a really good job of just demonstrating the anxiety that is being brought upon him, not just because of this weapon that he's building, but also the political pressure of the time period and in America during World War II and beyond. This is definitely a thinking person's movie as well. You have to pay attention the whole time. Nolan really loves telling stories out of order, which is one of the cool things about him, but that means you can't really miss things. Unfortunately, there is a lot of characters that show up where I'm like, wait, who's that again? Or they'll name drop someone later on in the movie. I'm like, am I supposed to know what that name means? Thankfully, though, when I see the person show up again, I'm like, okay, we get that person. So this is a very much a thinking person's movie. You have to pay attention and remember the names of certain people. It's also very much of a who's who in scientist worlds. If you are a fan of scientists during the 40s and 50s and the 60s and all that stuff, I can imagine this is kind of like watching an Avengers movie where you're like, oh, it's that person, oh, it's that person, it's that person, ooh, ooh, ooh. There were a lot of scientists that even I know, like, this is definitely a famous person, a famous scientist. I'm not a huge scientist person myself. I only know the really, really famous ones. But I could tell, like, oh, if you're like a physicist, geek, you'll probably like seeing all these people on screen. But it's not just a science movie, it's also very much a political thriller. And in a lot of ways, it reminded me of a movie that came out a long time ago, The Social Network, which is a movie that I love. But it's another movie that's kind of told out of order, where we see, different prosecutors prosecuting our protagonist, and we get that here with Cillian Murphy's character Robert Oppenheimer, and then the Robert Downey Jr. character Louis Strauss. So we get a lot of that there, and I really like how Nolan uses that to build tension, where he gives us one scene in the beginning of the movie, and then by the end of the movie, we see that scene again, but from a completely different perspective. And he does that a couple times. And it's really cool every single time he does it. And there's a lot of hype in this movie about, seeing a nuclear bomb go off. And I have to admit, it is really cool. You do want to see this, if you are going to watch it, see it on a big screen with big speakers. It really helped elevate the experience. It is on the longer side, unfortunately. It makes it feel a lot like an epic historical odyssey, but it doesn't really help with repeat viewings. So if you're not really in the mood for something so long, it's 3 hours long, then I would say give this one a skip. Maybe wait until streaming so you can watch it in chunks. It's also I don't want to, this isn't a spoiler, but the movie is a bit of a downer because it's talking about the nuclear bomb and the effects of said nuclear bomb and hydrogen bombs that came after the atomic bomb and all these different political factions vying for power and putting pressure on the scientists and the scientists trying to do their job, but also, the scientists are arguing amongst themselves over what's the right thing to do and all this stuff. And the movie ends with a very not so positive look on humanity, which, I kind of appreciated a very realistic approach of how this movie kind of shows that humanity kind of sucks. And it's not just the politicians. Our main character, Oppenheimer himself, he wasn't a all around great guy. I mean, he wasn't an awful guy, but he wasn't perfect. And the movie shows that. He was a bit of a, not a bit, he was a womanizer. Didn't have the best relationships with his wife and friends and with his colleagues and all that stuff. So it's not just the dirty politicians, but even the scientists, they're human too. And yeah, this movie also does a good job of just demonstrating how small we are in the grand scheme of things, of how we're just just one human in this big wide world, that people are always trying to change the narratives, and does the one person really matter, and the grand scheme of all these different countries and factions vying for power? What about the little guy? I definitely got that vibe in this movie. So yeah, definitely a good movie, but not for everybody for sure. Definitely a more adult thinking movie. Definitely on the longer side. It is past 1:30 in the morning, so I'm kind of zonked right now. But I still got energy. I had a great time at the movies. So yeah, give it a watch and tell me what you think in the comments.